It hurt to think. Julia Edwards' head pounded. Each thud of her heart caused an earthquake of pain. Every time that her thoughts came together, the beat scattered them again. Where am I? Julia wondered, opening her eyes. The brightness caused her to shut them again. What happened? After a moment, she forced herself to look. She glanced around at the metallic chamber that surrounded her. It was spotless and there wasn't a single flaw or rivet in its curved surface. The metal reflected a distorted image of her prone form. She looked like a heap of hair, flesh and cloth strewn across the chamber's floor. Why does my head hurt? Sitting up, she glanced around the room's interior. Save for the President of the former United States, it was completely empty. Light seemed to come from every direction, making it difficult for her to orient herself. A wave of nausea passed over her. Julia suppressed the urge to vomit. The taste of bile rose into the back of her mouth. Then, the memories came back to her. Slowly at first, then in a flood of images and sounds. It was like being engulfed by a maelstrom. The pounding in her head increased in ferocity. Air Force One. She had been half asleep on the bed near the rear of the plane. Her husband had just promised to meet her. A spaceship in South Dakota was the destination. New Horizon, built by a company called Ethereal Concepts. She had seen the advertisements. Sign up today, the billboards had read, and take one giant leap for mankind. Hillary told her that the Secretary of Defense had left the White House to get to the complex and commandeered the craft by force. Why wasn't I told? Julia demanded to know. Ma'am, her chief of staff replied. I proposed the idea to you myself several times today. You acted like you didn't even hear me. I'm not sure I did. Julia thought in agreement. Today has been a long day. Even that was a massive understatement. When she had been filled in on the rest of the plan, she agreed that while it wasn't much, it was something. The mission would go ahead to Mars as planned. From there, maybe they could continue to be in command of what few assets that remained at their posts. Maybe, who was she kidding? It was a horrible, desperate idea. It was also the only one anyone had left. Run and hide. It seemed cowardly. Julia wondered if the captain should go down with the ship. Are blind heroics any better? That had all been before she had spoken to James. He had comforted her as best he could. When their conversation had ended, Julia laid down to sleep. Her exhausted mind could barely function. As she felt herself sinking into unconsciousness, they attacked. A flash so bright that she could see the blood vessels on the inside of her closed eyelids had been followed by a roar and turbulence that Julia was sure would shake Air Force One apart. She had bolted upright and made her way quickly to the window of her plane. She was filled with horror by the sight. The alien vessel was so close that she couldn't see anything besides the curve of its metal hull, illuminated by the lights on the wings of Air Force One. A second later, one of the dozen escorting jets shot past the window in a blur of motion. A dozen alien craft in close pursuit. She heard explosions, muffled by Air Force One's reinforced hull. The fighters, taken by surprise when the giant ship had jumped out of warp right on top of them, were no match for the enemy. They fell rapidly in streaking fireballs toward the ground below. Air Force One was not engaged. The Ajixa had different plans for it. The plane's pilot tried to break off, pulling a hard left. The aircraft shuddered as it banked hard south. The alien craft easily matched their plane's speed and movement. Julia ran to the door to her quarters. She heard shouting in the hall. The voices were filled with panic. When she opened the door, she saw Secret Service agents running this way and that, their guns drawn in anticipation. Hillary looked petrified, clutching a stack of papers as though they might offer her some salvation. One of the agents ran towards the president, intending to protect her from whatever might come next. Thud. 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 The impacts rang out inside of the ship. "We're hit," cried one of the aides, a young blonde in panic. Suddenly, blades sheared through the hull of the aircraft. Within seconds they had cut a hole out of the side of the plane. The decompression threw Julia forward into one of the seats in front of her. The suction pinned her against its frame. She saw Hillary lose her grip and begin sliding towards the gaping hole that had appeared in the side of Air Force One. Her screaming was audible, even over the roar of the wind outside. As the chief of staff neared the wailing abyss, a great arm reached down and grabbed her. It was not human. The armored figure lifted her up like a rag doll with one claw. Using its other arms, it pulled itself in through the hole it had made. Julia had a sort of sickening fascination in watching it lift the chief of staff into the screaming winds. The thing held her at eye level for a few moments. It regarded her from behind the jet black glass of its visor. Hillary thrashed and kicked to no avail. Then, almost flippantly, it tossed her out the hole behind it. She vanished in an instant. Her screams were lost in the roaring winds. It was getting hard to breathe. Julia tried to move, but her arms were not strong enough. Instead, she watched in horror as two more of the aliens followed the first into the plane. Concussions rang out as the Secret Service agents, who, having finally braced themselves against the suction, were emptying their pistol ammo at the enemy. The aliens shrugged off the bullets with ease. They stepped deeper into the craft, their heads turned back and forth, searching for something. Julia had a dreadful feeling that she knew what or who it was. When they ran out of bullets, Julia saw two of her agents gave each other a look. Even with all of the commotion, one look was all it took. She saw them steel themselves. Then, with a ferocious war cry, the pair of agents launched themselves at the alien closest to the hole. It turned to face them, sickeningly long blades extending out from its upper arms. They crashed into the alien, who struggled to hold its ground. The two men let out one last roar. With a final heave, all three toppled out of the hole and vanished into the night sky. Even a jigsaw armor was not made to withstand an impact at terminal velocity. If there was a Valhalla, Julia knew where she'd find her two agents. One of the armored monstrosities charged the remaining agents, its blades flashing in the fluorescent light. Bright red blood splattered far and wide across the interior of the presidential plane. None were spared. The remaining alien glanced around the craft. Then it saw her. Julia tensed with fear. The thing stepped towards her. It paused just within arm's reach of the red-headed woman, President Edwards. She heard a robotic voice ask over the howling winds. She nodded, beginning to feel lightheaded. The last thing she remembered was it reaching towards her with its cruel talons. Now she was here. Wherever here was. What will they do with me? She wasn't sure she really wanted to know the answer. The author's name and the link to original text is in the description. Consider tapping the thumbs up and pressing the subscribe button if you enjoyed this video. And please join our channel.